Welcome back to the Grimm Workshop Trapping School. Today we're going to be going over the L7 snare trigger that's included on the Jamie Burleigh signature card. So the Jamie Burleigh signature card is kind of focused on hunting and fishing. This has fishing hooks, as you can see. I've got snare locks, I've got Paiute deadfall triggers, and then these four items here, there's a couple different ways you can use these, but these are the L7 trigger components. So we have a full review of the Jamie Burleigh signature card here on the Grimm channel. And in that video I showed you can use these kind of like this. So you can set them up as either a barbed arrow point or a small gig. So they're kind of handy for that reason, but the bread and butter is going to be setting this up as a snare trigger. So the L7 snare trigger, one end is going to be in the ground and the second end is going to be attached to our spring engine. And they're going to lock together, and when that's disturbed it's going to pull free and lift the animal in the air. So if you carry a different Grimm card, or if you had set those L7s already and wanted to make more, they are not hard to make at all. So this is just a wooden stake. This length of the stake is going to depend on the soil conditions that you're driving this into and the lift from your spring engine. And then we have a corresponding L part. And then I've got this groove for the top, so this one's a little bit fancier than it needs to be. But this is the mate that it's going to go, so this is your contact point. And same thing, so this is going to be lifted up, and then when this is pulled free by the animal, it's going to lift the animal in the air. And my favorite thing about the L7 is you can set this up a lot of different ways. You can use this on a snare, but you can also fish with this. Even though the L7 is easy to carve, the amount of force it takes to set the trap off, or how touchy it's going to be, is going to be dependent on this wood bearing surface. So this wooden surface is pretty darn smooth, but it's never going to be as smooth as the manufactured steel ones on the Jamie Burleigh card. So with this, once you've got this set, you've got very little force from the animal, and it's going to set the trap off, and you're going to get more game and you're going to get more fish because of that. So it doesn't matter if you're going after fish or game, you're going to need to select a spring engine in the field. Now I'm going to be setting this on a bench top here just so you can see it crystal clear. And in this case, I'm going to be using a piece of PVC. So when you select the weight or the upward force of your spring engine, you've got to keep your game animals in mind. Now with a standard locking cable snare, or a professional snare like you would choose to have if you were actually snaring and trapping for food, the animal can't bite through it. So you snare a raccoon, or you snare a rabbit, or you snare even a squirrel, it cannot turn and just bite through that cable. If you're using improvised snare, so if you're using paracord or if you're using bank line, any animal is able to just turn through and bite through that cordage without keeping it under tension. So the whole point of this spring snare is to keep enough tension on it so it can't just turn its head and bite. So you need to at least have enough force to lift the front half of the animal up. If that's not the case, then you're going to have to either set this up a little higher, you're going to have to get a stronger spring engine. There's a lot of different options, but you've got to always keep your game in mind. Now in certain applications, you're going to want to monitor the height of that lift as well. In cases such as a raccoon or a groundhog, you're dealing with an animal that's pretty tall when it stands up. If this is a fishing application, in that case, setting the hook is fine. So at this point, once it sets the hook, if it's a bigger fish, it can play this pole, and that's just going to work out better for you. You're going to have a better chance of having a live fish on the hook when you get there. So the PVC is pretty good to learn on. You can use a bungee cord, you can use slingshot bands, but in the field you're going to want to go with a branch or a sapling. Now this is a pretty prime example of what you want. This is flexible, but it returns back. So you can imagine if this was a big leafy branch, when this springs up, those leaves are going to kind of act as a brake. So in the field, when you have made your decision and you selected this as your spring pole, you're going to want to make sure you strip off all the branches. You're going to get a much faster and much more effective trap that way. Now another thing to keep in mind when selecting your spring engine is there should probably be some animals around here. You can make awesome looking traps, and if the animals don't naturally go that way, you're kind of wasting your time. Now, you are kind of limited, but you're going to want to set this in a funnel. So you're going to want to set this stake component. So this is going to be the bottom of the trap. You're going to want this line to be straight up and down, or as much as possible. So in this case, the game trail would be just to the left or just to the right of this stake. If this is stretched out too far here, or if it's stretched back, or if this was to pull laterally, that is going to impede the action of the trigger. So then the trigger is not going to get as clean as a release. You're going to want a straight uplift to be most effective. Now, if you cannot find a spring engine in a confined area like this, or a funnel, you can also cut a good pole and move it. This piece of PVC here is just on a stake. So if I had a stake driven into the ground, I could just lash it and get the same effect. Now, for my amount of lift, you can see this is kind of variable. It's just like a recurve bow. But your height is kind of important too. So again, if I'm targeting a raccoon and this is my amount of lift, that's really not enough to even tighten the noose. So you're going to want to make sure this is going to be a tall enough pole that you can get a full throw on the action of the pole. Now, if I bend this past horizontal, it's probably going to take set. Now, what I mean by taking set is when it bends down, it doesn't return to this upright position. You see this one doesn't do it perfectly, and you're not going to get anything perfect. But when it starts raising a quarter of its throw, you're really losing a lot of your trap's potential. Now, because the L7 on the Jamie Burleigh signature card can function as a couple different things, this can be a gig or an arrow point as well. These holes are kind of small. So if you've got paracord, you can see we got some issues here. And this is 36 bank line. So this is the standard size bank line that I carry. And this one is not going through there either. So what I'm going to do is I can use inner strands of paracord, but today I'm just going to open up this 3-ply bank line, and I'm going to take one strand of bank line. So here's the bank line, and when I unply it, it goes through there with no problem. So now that I got that bank line through there, I'm just going to tie this in an overhand knot. So you could go fancy and do a figure 8. This is not going to have that much force on it. So there's the overhand knot, and I'm just looking for a nice solid loop like this. Now I'm going to take this loop and I'm going to attach it to the line coming off of my spring engine. I'm going to determine how far down I want to pull this trap, and in this case it's going to be just out of the range of the camera here. So I'm going to determine it's going to be right here, so I'm just going to pinch this line. I'm going to check it. That looks pretty good to me. Now there's several ways you can do this. You can tie an overhand knot, you can marry your trigger to the main line, you can tie it in the loop itself. I think that's probably the easiest way to do it right now. So I'm just going to run this up to this loop. And I'm going to tie just another overhand. Kind of like that. Here's a pretty good shot of the L7 trigger with that inner strand right here. So this is untwisted bank line, or whatever smaller diameter cord you've got. And then this is just another overhand knot with a loop. So right now these are attached. So that's half the trap done. So I've still got the bottom half of this. So I've got this bank line, or you could use inner strand of paracord. Same thing, I'm just going to run it through and make an overhand loop. So at this point I've got my stake here, and this is something I'm going to have to fabricate in the field as well. And I'm just going to take this stake and tie my trigger loop to it. Now if I'm leaving a 4-inch tail, that is affecting the height of this, so keep that in mind. You can drive the stake into the ground deeper, you can tie it lower to the bottom. If I had any natural branches or stubs, I would utilize that to help keep the lashing tight. So there's a couple things to note here. First of all, this is a lot of potential. So this thing's whipping around, and you're able to gig small game with these trigger ends, so you know they're sharp. So If you haven't done this a lot, it's probably a really good idea to put some type of eye protection on. You've got the kinetic energy from your spring engine, and then you're making it worse by adding a sharp metal hook essentially to the end of it. If you have set these a lot, it's probably still a good idea to go with eye protection. So this trap is going to work, and it's going to work pretty darn fast. But just because this spring engine goes off and the trigger fires, we're not going to catch anything because we don't have a snare on here yet. So I've got maybe 18 inches of line here, and that is about a minimum. If you had longer, you can make it work. So with this piece, this is what you're going to tie your noose in. This is what you're going to attach to your fishing line and then throw your hook into the water. So if you were running shy of cordage, or this didn't quite have enough, or you underestimated, you can always tie it on later, but you're going to need a tail essentially, and that's what we're going to make our loop with. So we're ready to set the trap now. So at this point, I'm just going to draw this down. I'm going to mate our two ends together. And I'm just going to ease off on the trap. Now my eyes are free, my hands are clear. Now we got a set trap. So it sets that simply, and you see that minimum contact point. Now this tail here, this is where you would attach your snare loop, or you could tie your fishing line onto this. And then whenever it gets disturbed, once that's set, I'll try to turn a little bit without setting it off. Any little movement on this L7 trigger is going to set the trap off. So that L7 is a variable trigger depending on how much contact point you've got. If you cross it, you're going to have a different trip weight than if you set it in line with each other. And if you barely have the ends touching, that's going to be obviously your most sensitive option. And there are other ways to set this. I'm going to go over those in other videos, but this is definitely something that you need to practice. Again, watch your eyes on this. You do not want to hurt yourself while training survival skills. That's kind of goes against the grain of what we're trying to do in the first place. So once you've mastered the L7s that are included on the Jamie Burleigh card, go ahead and try to duplicate those off the landscape. Just take your knife and try practicing carving an L7 and setting an L7. But I guarantee learning how to use them on the Jamie Burleigh card is going to make your carved versions a whole lot faster and a whole lot easier.